Hi, my name is Anthony Turner. I'm Director of the Small Business Institute. Today, my guest is Adrian Spencer from Grant Ready. Now, Grant Ready is an online website, and Adrian's going to give us some more information about that, where small business owners in Australia can actually go and find out a lot about all of the different types of available money that may be there. Adrian, welcome.
Thank you, Anthony. Great to be with you today.
Now, my understanding, Adrian, your background is sort of mining in two camps. First off, you studied geology and stuff.
Correct, that's right.
And then you got into the accounting space and and now mining for money from those who've got it to give.
That's exactly right.
Yeah?
Yes.
So tell us a bit about your background.
Well, interesting history. I started as a graduate with Rio Tinto, working in mining as an exploration geologist.
Yes.
And after a number of years of doing that, I ended up back in the city looking for a new career.
Yes.
And I was hired by the big four accounting firms who were actually signing up the mining companies to access funding on their behalf.
Okay.
So the transition was I would help put mining language into layman's terms in grant applications. Okay. And that started me into the journey of understanding how grants and the whole grant process works.
Okay. And then you've transitioned across to Grant Ready.
Yes.
Which is an organisation that is there that provides information about grants from all sorts of areas, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. About 9 years ago we started Grant Ready, and we started on a single premise that we wanted to make it easy to find out what grant programs were available so that businesses, small, big, any size, could easily know what was available and tap into the grant options for themselves.
Okay, and there's a lot of money available, I believe, isn't there?
There's a lot. In fact, it blew us away. It took us a couple of years to map out all of the funding programs that were available. Yeah. But today, we're aware of, just for businesses, approximately $50 billion worth of grant funding.
That's billion with a B.
Correct.
Okay.
The big one, yes. And that's across a lot of programs. That's over 700 different grant programs.
Yeah.
So that funding is coming from federal government, it's coming from state government, and even a portion of it comes from local council.
And I would imagine, though, that, from what I know, that money is not necessarily available to sort of Joe who wants to start up his milk bar or anything like that. It may be, but not necessarily. There's lots of different types of grants and things, isn't there?
Correct. They're very varied in their application and who can apply.
Okay.
So generally there's not a lot of funding for start-up companies.
Yes.
And that's generally when people put their hand up and say, I need some funding, is there anything available?
Yes.
But even though there's not generally funding for start-up companies, there is funding for activities that occur in the start-up phase.
Okay, so what sort of activities?
So, well, I think a really important thing is when we ask people what they're doing, we don't just say what industry are you in, we say what are you doing? What are the activities that you're undertaking? And they tend to think of their business as a whole, so we break it down. And we say, are you doing export or do you plan to do export?
Yes.
Are you developing a business plan? Are you developing internal or improving internal processes? Are you doing innovation or some form of research and development?
Yes.
Or are there perhaps some environmental or sustainability aspects to what you're doing?
Yes.
All of those activities can attract funding in different forms.
Okay. And sorts of funding amounts?
Wow, it varies a lot.
Yeah.
So some of the smaller funds would be as small as maybe $2,000 to $5,000, up to $10,000. We'd say that's the small category, but by no means irrelevant. For companies that are getting going, they can put $10,000 to use very effectively.
Yes.
Then there's sort of the mid bracket, which would be probably say $50,000 up to about $500,000.
Yes.
And then there's the large grants, which are sort of $1 million upwards.
Yes.
We've even seen grants of $100 million, but they're rare, they're very competitive, and they're very hard to get.
Yeah. And more for very specific tasks?
Yes.
Yeah, or specific political directions to actually help suit those things?
Yeah, and look, this probably applies to all grants.
Yes.
Most people sort of say, well, I've got a need, I desperately want a grant, can I have some funding?
Yep.
And we say, look, that's a good starting point, but be careful with your perspective, because you have to ask the question, why do grants exist? And the reason grants exist is because they're coming from government who is trying to achieve some form of public policy.
Yes.
And so grants are a barometer, you could say, of whatever the policy of the day or the government of the day is trying to achieve.
Yes.
And each government is trying to achieve different things. They might be trying to increase skills and training. They might be trying to create more jobs. They might be trying to create more innovation or create more exports.
Yes.
So as governments come and go, you'll see different emphasis on different areas according to what they're trying to achieve.
Sure.
if people can create alignment between what they need and what the government's trying to achieve, then that's a great starting point.
Okay, and more opportunities then
Yes.
for that. I mean, I guess one of the classic ones that's at the moment is probably with the demise of the Australian car industry is the reskilling of people into different levels of manufacturing and everything else to help take up that slack.
Yes.
Yeah.
Spot on. So since that's happened, we've seen an emergence of programs which are retraining people,
Yes.
trying to create new manufacturing jobs and industries, especially in the areas that have been impacted the most.
Okay.
So there's probably 10 or 15 programs that have emerged just in the last 12 months to help in that area.
Okay. Now, knowing that there's a grant available is one thing, okay, or finding it, and your website, which is Grant Guru for the business side of things. So you can either look at Grant Ready or grantguru.com.au and you'll get information for those. So that's the opportunity to actually find them.
Yes.
And once you've identified something, then you've got to go through the process. And there is always a process, isn't there?
There is, that's
Yeah.
exactly right.
So maybe for the benefit of our viewers and listeners, if you could actually give us an idea of what that process is.
And I think that there's confusion because most people think that the perfect grant program is just floating around, it's going to land on their desk and all they have to do is fill in the paperwork.
Yes.
And if that's your starting point, generally you're setting yourself up for failure.
Yep.
Sorry to say.
Yeah.
You've got to take a few steps back, and the key is knowing how grants work.
Mm-hmm.
If you know how grants work, then you can track grant programs. So when the right one comes along, you can identify it.
Okay.
Then you're able to apply for it. And then once you apply for it, if you're awarded it, you're able to secure that funding and keep that funding.
Yes.
So these are our 4 steps.
Okay.
So you have to understand how grants work,
Mm-hmm.
you have to find the grants, then you have to write effectively, and then you have to keep your funding. So most people start with writing the grant, but we go back to step 1 and we say, you just have to know how grants work. That's the first point.
So how do they work?
Right. So as I said before, grants are trying to achieve a certain policy.
Yes.
So you have to understand, number 1, what is the grant trying to achieve?
Yes.
What are you trying to achieve? And if there's alignment, that's a good starting point.
Okay.
Then a grant program, every grant program will have an eligibility criteria.
Yes.
That eligibility will be different for every program. So you just need to read it and see if you're eligible.
Okay.
But most people make the mistake here because they presume because they're eligible that they're going to get it.
Okay.
So we say most grant programs aren't entitlements, they're competitive. So if it's competitive and if you are eligible, then you have to understand how are they assessed. And the grant program will spell it out. It will say you are going to be assessed according to these criteria.
Okay.
And then you can look and see, are you competitive?
Okay.
And you can make a decision and say, yes, maybe we've got an 80% chance of getting this, or maybe we've got a 20% chance.
Yep.
And once you've read that criteria, which will be spelt out in the guidelines, you can decide if you want to proceed.
Okay. So assuming that I've found a potential bucket of money for me,
Yes.
and I've met all the eligibility criteria, then I've got to do the application.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And having been in the sort of the mentoring game for a while, I've seen applications. We've actually done a number of them for our organisations and recently won one, of which I was involved in. And there's a lot more to it than just answering a few questions on a piece of paper.
Yes, indeed. And congratulations on securing funding because it's a challenge.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think that as long as they wax lyrical and say everything they want to say, that they'll secure the funding. But grants are becoming very competitive. So we have some sort of top tips in completing an application form.
Okay. Would you like to share a few of those?
Sure. The first one I would say is really read and understand the question.
Okay.
So many people know so much information about their business and they're so passionate about it that they really just want to tell everything they know. And we say, just curtail that and really answer the question that the form's asking you. If you answer the questions directly and you stick to the word limits, you're putting yourself in a good position to be able to secure funding.
Sure.
That's the starting point.
And it's a difference between sort of, if it's asked, do you have experience in this area? Instead of saying, yes, I've got 20 years experience, or giving your whole CV for the last 20 years or something like that, it's finding that blend in the middle, isn't it? Which just gives comfort that you understand what's required for the particular work that has to be done.
That's exactly right. And we call this evidence-based applications.
Yep.
And it's actually easy not to do this. A lot of people fall into the trap of just saying what they want to say, but without backing it up.
Yes.
And it's like anything. If you want to convince the government that you want funding, you have to give them comfort. You know, this is taxpayers' money, so they're being really careful and diligent about who they give this money to. So you have to produce the evidence behind what you say. You can't just say a fact, you have to back it up.
Yes.
Now, that could be anecdotal, it could be with empirical evidence, it could be different ways of presenting it. And sometimes it's hard to back it up with facts and figures. That's the best way to do it.
Yes.
But if you can't, find some other way of doing that. And if you can back up what you're saying and it gives the reader confidence, it's putting your application in a stronger position to succeed.
Sure. So let's say we've actually been through the process, we've actually found the bucket, as I said before, we're eligible, we've actually put in the application, and assuming we've answered the questions okay, we're now in that competitive process where somebody is scrutinising all of the applications that they get, and they're going to make some decisions about who's going to get some money or not. One of the things that I've found is that when you actually get the letter or the call or whatever, the email, whatever it is, that says you've got some money, usually there's another set of conditions that sort of come along with this as well, which says, now we're going to give you some money. These are the other bits of what you're going to have to do to actually report on it, to maintain the integrity of the grant and all these other things.
That's exactly right. So it's not like they just cut you a cheque for the full amount and away you go on into the sunset and live happily ever after. There are terms and conditions. So there are shackles that come with that funding. And part of that will be written into your contract.
Yes.
And before you sign that contract, you need to understand what's in there. Some of those terms and conditions might say that we only release the funding in milestones.
Yes.
And that milestone of funding is only released on meeting certain achievements, which have to be reported on maybe quarterly, maybe 6 monthly.
Yes.
And so there are things that have to be done. There might be requirements if you're creating IP, perhaps that IP can't be sold offshore. So it's important to go into this with your eyes open.
Yes.
We met a company that had won $5 million worth of funding, and at that point they decided to read the contract. And their lawyers advised them they couldn't accept the funding, and they had to give up the $5 million because they weren't aware, they hadn't thought of reading the contract. The contract was available before they even applied.
Sure.
It was on the website, they could have read the terms and conditions. It was heartbreaking to see them lose that funding just because they weren't aware that they were going to have to jump certain hurdles and still undertake certain compliance in order to keep the funding.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a major part, isn't it? It's knowing that the money is there to help you grow, but there are conditions attached to that, and there is certainly reporting because the government or whoever the funder is rightly expects to get some feedback about how this money is being used so that they can be sure that it's being used wisely.
That's right, and I'd totally agree with that. So my only advice to people who are applying for these grant programs is that they're just aware of what those requirements are so they can make an informed decision. And if the requirements are too onerous, then they can step back before they put all the effort in. But we find from experience that once most people understand the terms, they're generally happy with them and they can get their head around them and they can find a way to make them work.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess there's also if I go back to the application process, some of the ones that I've worked on and submitted, they can be fairly open to interpretation about how you actually deliver as long as you actually meet the results.
I would agree with that. From my experience, in the application you generally lock yourself into delivering a certain project and certain outcomes, but in reality, things don't always work out the way you planned.
Exactly.
And what we say to companies that are in that situation is go back to the administrators. Once you've won the funding, they're on your side.
Yes.
So they really want you to succeed. And they understand that outcomes can change, they're not always predictable, and just go back and have a discussion with them.
Yeah.
The worst they'll say is, no, sorry, you have to stick to the original plan.
Yes.
The best they might say is, yes, we understand, we're flexible, as long as you can still achieve some worthwhile outcomes, we're happy to vary the approach that we take.
Sure. So in terms of where to go, we've mentioned the website, so it's grantready.com and .com.au, I should say.
Well, yes, so we set up the online database which we call Grant Guru.
Yep.
So to keep it simple, people can just go to grantguru.com.
Okay.
And that will take them straight to the search engine.
Okay.
And they can start searching from there.
And one of the lovely things I like about your website, which we use, is that I don't have to keep going there.
Yes.
I can actually set you up to tell me what's available based around criteria that I'm interested in.
That's exactly right. As much as we love our database, we don't expect everybody to visit it every week to find out what's new.
Yeah.
We realise that people are busy in their businesses just trying to do their core business, and they don't have time to keep searching and trying to find all this information. So we've set up a feature on the website where they can put in their preferences, whether that's their location or their particular industry or their particular activities.
Yes.
And every time a new program goes in that matches their preferences, they'll receive an email alert.
Yeah.
So it just says, hey, this might be of interest to you. Here's a link if you want to find more information.
Now, going with the grants and writing the applications, there is a skill involved around that, and really, to be fair to our audience, it's not everybody's cup of tea to be able to write these things. They can be very demanding, and I could say that from personal experience. And my understanding is that the organisation actually has a service to actually assist people with that as well.
We do to an extent. So it really varies. Every business has different capability and has different time constraints. Yeah. And so we don't advocate that for every grant program you need a consultant.
Sure.
We just believe that it's horses for courses.
Yes.
Which means we need to provide people with options.
Yes.
Some people, the grant might be for $5,000 and it might be one page.
Yeah.
We would say to them, you don't need our help.
Yeah.
You can do that yourself and just go for it.
Yeah.
Some of the tougher applications where there's more money involved, you might need extra resources and extra help. And if you don't have that within your organisation or within your group of friends or within your advisory circle, then yes, you might want to seek some consulting assistance. So we write grant applications for research and development, tax incentive programs, but we also know all the grant writers. Yes. So we don't take referral fees. All we do is we list all the grant writers, we list their expertise, all of that information's available. So if somebody's in regional Victoria and they want some assistance with a particular sort of grant program, they can find a grant writer to help them.
Fabulous, okay. Now, one of the other things that's going through my mind is that, is there a point where getting the grant money, the actual cost of actually servicing the grant is actually prohibitive to actually getting the grant money?
Yeah. This is a great question because so many people see grants as free money. They see it's this honeypot where they can just dip their hands in and yay, it's all free, it's all amazing. Yeah. And it's not true at all because there's an opportunity cost. Yes. And we even see some people become so distracted chasing after grants that they forget their core business. Okay. And they expect us to be saying, go for it. But we say, no, grants just has a place in your business. Yes. And you have to find the right place in your business. And sometimes a grant is right for you and sometimes it's not. But when you find the right grant program and you've got the application form, have a look at it. See how much resource is going to be involved in putting it together. Have a look at what's going to be required for the reporting requirements. If you can manage that, go for it. Take it on. It's worth a shot. Sure. It's worth the risk. But if that's too much, then it's okay to step back and say, no, we don't have the resource for this at the moment. We don't have the time. Grant programs come around again and again. Yes. There's nothing wrong with waiting for the next time or waiting till you're better positioned or better prepared. There's nothing more frustrating than investing all the time and effort into it and then losing a grant program. And then we've met those people and they're bitter and they're twisted and they're frustrated and they're like, I should have just focused on my core business. So we say just find the right balance and work out what's right for you. Yeah,
cool, good advice. I think with grants, one of the biggest things that I would suggest, and based on my own experience of working with them, is that it is really important to understand that yes, there is a lot of time and effort in terms of researching and actually writing the grant itself. There's then a lot of compliance in terms, and rightly so, in terms of you've got this money and particularly from government of reporting, and typically in all the ones that we do, it's quarterly reporting, and there's usually sort of a fair bit of time involved in gathering data and putting that together to report back and milestones. And then you've got meetings and different things that go along with this particular one that we're working with. There is a fair amount of costs associated with it, and sometimes the grants allow you to recoup some of that management cost, in inverted commas, out of the grant monies, and others they don't.
That's correct. And we say to people that, you have to do what's right for you, but once you've got a grant and you've successfully acquitted it, it actually sets you up for more grants.
Yes.
Because you get better at it, you know how it works. Some people say to us, I've got a grant, have I used my quota? And we say, well, no, it's the opposite. Once you've got a grant, it's easier to get more grants because government is more confident with you, that you've jumped through their hoops before, it's easier for you to do it again, and you're better at doing it. So we've worked with organisations in central Victoria who dipped their toe in the water and they got a small grant worth about $30,000. They were successful. A year later, they went back and applied for another grant, and they kept doing this, and over 6 years, they picked up about 5 different grant programs worth about $2 million.
Wow.
It became easier and easier for them every time. After a while, they didn't need us. They knew how to use the resources, they knew how to look for the programs, how to pick the right ones. Some people sort of say, well, I don't want to apply for anything. And some people say, I want to apply for everything.
Yep.
We say it's just a balance.
Yeah.
You know, just start slow and just get ready. And sooner or later, the right program will come along for you.
Yes.
You've just got to be ready for it.
Yeah. And I think one of the earlier points that you made, it's understanding what you really want the money for, rather than just I want some money.
And in the number of people where we ask them the question, we say, how much money do you need and what do you want it for?
Yeah.
And the answer is, I want as much as I can and I want it for my business.
Yeah.
And we're like, that's great. Enthusiasm, 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
But we need to break it down.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to articulate exactly what are you going to spend that money on and how is that going to help your business and what outcomes is that going to achieve.
Yeah.
Once you start thinking critically like that, then you're in a position to be able to find grants and apply for them. It's quite basic business plan 101. But a lot of people don't have the time or the ability to do that. So if you can get that critical thinking right, it positions you well.
Yeah. So, just the last couple of questions for you, Adrian, is that, you know, apart from the obvious one of go to Grant Guru, what would you say would be the number one tip for somebody who is thinking about, you know, applying for grants or searching for grants?
Number one would be start early.
Yep.
So it doesn't happen overnight. This is not something that just happens without effort or happens miraculously.
Yes.
You need to plan. If you plan and set yourself up for long-term success, you will be effective with grants. And by planning, I mean tap into a source so you know what's available. Be prepared at the right time to invest some resources and effort into the application process.
Yes.
And follow it through.
Yes.
And if you miss out on your first grant, don't be disappointed. Sooner or later, the right one will come along and you will be successful.
Okay. And is there a common trap that you see many people fall into that you'd say, hey, listen, stay away from this, don't do this?
Yeah, I think that expectation, it's just managing expectation.
Okay.
And if people have a sales expectation within their business, they know that for every 10 times they knock on a door, they might make one sale.
Yes.
It's the same in grants. You know, don't be disappointed, don't give up, don't be despondent,
Yes.
and have an outside perspective. I know that's hard when you're inside your business and
Yes.
you're passionate about what you're doing.
Yes.
Step out of your shoes, step into the government's shoes. As soon as you do that, we find that it totally increases people's ability to access funding.
Yeah.
They're thinking strategically, they're thinking from a government point of view now,
Yes.
and they're setting themselves up for success. That's the key.
Okay, great. All right, we've been talking with Adrian Spencer from Grant Ready. If you want to find out more about grants, then please go to Grant Ready or Grant Guru. You'll just Google those names, they'll come up for you. And I can vouch for Grant Guru because we got some of our grants just by following that website. Thanks, Adrian, for spending some time.
Pleasure. Thanks, Anthony.
Cool.